Hello, everyone. I wanted to go over the post-reading activity with you for the end of this week. So at this point, you've read and annotated the Perez article, Want to Go to College, Learn to Fail. And the main idea or theme that we were able to derive from that text is that college admissions officers are not looking for a perfect student candidate, right? No one's perfect, and to paint oneself as perfect and flawless and overly skilled it's disingenuine, right? It's not genuine. It shows that you're not like a real person in a way. And what college admissions officers are looking for is a real person, right? We're real people. We have flaws. We've tried and failed, but just because we failed doesn't mean you're a failure, but rather that from what we gleaned from this article, failure allows a great opportunity for growth. In the face of failure, in the face of adversity or hardship, we are forced or tasked with the challenge of overcoming that failure. So instead of giving up, how did you change or develop a skill or build upon your own characteristics or learn new values to overcome that failure? And that's what we're going to be focusing on for this writing task. And the purpose of this, regardless of if you plan to go to college after high school, if you're going into the workforce, the military, what have you, it's still important to highlight how failure forced you to grow and how you were able to overcome failure. A lot of times this is not only a college admissions interview question, but it's also just a general interview question for any kind of job. Before I get started on explaining the prompt, I want to highlight that this is only a one-page assignment. So don't stress. I'm going to talk about the prompt. I do have a PowerPoint for it, but that is not to stress you out, to make you think that this is a huge writing assignment, but rather to model to you how I break down prompts, how I look at the tasks that a writing prompt asks us to answer, so that you get into the habit of developing these own tasks for the way that you approach a prompt. So that's what I'm modeling for you today. So at this point, like I said, you've read the annotated and the article, Want to Go to College, Learn to Fail. And just like how Perez interviewed these students that showed that they failed and how they grew from this failure, you're going to do the same thing in this assignment. So your task for this assignment is to write a one-page, minimum 250 words, double-spaced, which will just be right here in this little box in the response table. So 250 words, I guess it'd be kind of hard to measure a page in that. But you're going to describe one event or one moment when you were less than perfect and explain to a reader what your response to that moment says about your character, values, or potential for your plans after high school. And as a helpful tip, I've included that you should focus on what you learned from that failure and what that says about your character. What lessons did you learn from this failure? How did you grow? How are you now more equipped because of this failure? And for that reason, your focus on this one pager should not be how you failed, right? It should be what you did after that failure. So it's kind of the same idea. Well, basically, if you only have 250 words to write, you don't want to explain this whole moment about this soccer game that you failed and for 3/4 of the page and then just spend a few sentences on how you overcame that failure. The main point to show how you grew from that failure is to focus on your response to that failure, right? Did you learn something when you failed? Did you fail and then work really hard to build a new skill or study really hard? Or maybe it was something more emotional or mental health wise, and you learn just how determined you can be or how much of a hard worker you can be. And how are you now more equipped personally because of that failure? And another thing I want to emphasize too is to highlight your word count at the end of your response. And if you don't know how to do that, at the top here in Google Docs, right where my mouse is, you can see here, you hit tools, and then you're going to highlight your written text and hit word count, and it'll show you your word count, and you'll just type that in. But to highlight your one pager, I wanted to show you this presentation. So again, your task is to write a one-page, 250 words, double-spaced in that text box description of an event or moment when you were less than perfect and explain to the reader what your response to that moment says about your character, values, or potential. And that part here, right, that I think there's a little laser tool. Where is it? Oh, okay. So that part here, right, explaining what your response was to that moment and what it says about your character, values, or potential, that should be your main focus of this one-page prompt. Again, it's only one page. However, what I want you guys to see is how to highlight important aspects of a prompt. And so that's what I'm going to show you in this next slide. So when you see a prompt, you're like, okay, so how many things is this like actually telling me to do? Well, one of the ways that I do that is to what I call chunk the prompt. So when you chunk the prompt, you look at the prompt and say, okay, so how many tasks is it telling me? How many questions can I chunk or break this prompt down into, right? So can it be split up into separate questions? What is the prompt actually asking me? What is it asking you to do? A prompt it's not a suggestion, right? It's telling you to do something. Essentially, a prompt is a checklist that you can go back and cross out as you write your essay. Also, a thing to consider, what themes or main ideas must I include in my response to the prompt? If we're talking about a description of a moment when we failed, one of the themes would be overcoming failure, right? How did we overcome failure? And what does it reveal about the kind of person that I am? Am I determined, hardworking, ambitious? Am I a quick learner? All that kind of stuff. And then, of course, what is your end goal of your response? So your end goal, you can't just say is your entire essay, but rather it's the message that you want your reader to walk away with. So this is what it looks like, for at least how I do it. And then you will have further practice with this later on in the quarter of how I chunk prompts. So in this prompt, I was able to identify 3 main chunks, and you can see them here in their separate colors. So by breaking it down into 3 main chunks, I'm basically saying that this prompt is asking me to do 3 main things. And when I went through here, I said, okay, so write 100 minimum 250 words, like duh, obviously I have to do that, right? But I need to describe an event or a moment in which I was less than perfect. I need to explain to the reader, oh, my fingers aren't there, two. I need to explain to the reader what my response to that moment was, right? So describe the event, what was my response? And lastly, and most importantly, what does that response, right, my response to that moment say about my character, values, or potential plans for after high school? And again, this is not strictly geared towards college-bound students, workforce, military, right? There's no one path. There's no one right path. However, it's important for us to reflect on these, self-reflexive prompts, right? But my main focus for this is to teach you how do you break down a prompt. And so as you see here, I kind of put 3 chunks into 3 questions, right? Describe a moment when you were less than perfect / failed. What was your response, right? How did you respond to this failure? What did you do? How did you overcome that failure? And what does overcoming that failure reveal about you? So questions 2 and 3 that I was able to chunk from this prompt are probably the most important. All right, you of course need to describe the moment when you failed. If it was a baseball game or a piano recital or perhaps something with a friend or a family member. Like, we need a context, but this is the main idea. This is what you want your reader to come across with, to walk away with. And you guys will be able to chunk your own prompts later on, but chunking is so important because as you see, as you're writing your page response, you could be like, oh, yeah, boom, check. I described that event. Okay, did I explain what my response was? Yeah. Did I show how I overcame it? Check, boom. What does overcoming this failure reveal about me? Did I show that it revealed that I was ambitious and hardworking? Oh yeah, I did. Boom. So you make a prompt more digestible and more tackleable by deconstructing it into separate questions. So then rather being this scary word problem, they just become like a checkmark task for you to do, just like a chores list, right? So I hope you find this helpful. I have 2 more slides to help you out with. I'm sorry about the screencast being a little bit longer, but I wanted to give you guys as much support as possible. Step 2. So how do you brainstorm a prompt? So in one clear and concise sentence, right, you should be able to write one event that you would like to talk about. Things to consider. What is the context of this event? Who, when, and what? Who was involved? Was it you and your teammates? You and a family member? You and a friend? When was it? You don't want to go too far back because you guys are in high school, right? So you don't want to focus on a failure that you may have been, during third grade PE, right? At that point, we're like, okay, you were half your age. We don't care about that anymore. Not that we don't care, but you know what I mean. And what was it? Was it a game? Was it a family conversation? Was it a hike, a camping trip? I don't know, anything. Were you quail hunting? I don't know. But you also want to think about what was the goal, right? What did you want? Did you want to win the scholarship? Did you want to win that tournament? And how did you not achieve it? Basically, how did you fail? So what was the goal and how did you fail? And how did you feel when you failed? One of the things that I suggest you steer away from is explaining your failure. And then one sentence that I see a lot is, I then realized that I just had to work harder and then I was successful. You don't just wake up one morning and realize how to overcome failure, right? It's a process. So that's what this question here is asking you. How did you overcome this failure? What was the process? Did you practice? Did you study? Did you work on your communication skills? But you don't just open up your fridge, grab a glass of milk, and come to the realization of how to be more successful, right? That's not how life works. Because college admissions officers want to know the process, right? Because to say that you just realized how to be more successful shows that you just realized how to be perfect. And that's not how this works. And college admissions officers want to see how you work. What is your process? How do you practice? How did you study? How did you work hard to reattempt your goal and overcome it this time despite previously failing? And of course, and perhaps the most important part, what does this growth reveal about you? So you don't want to focus on the failure, more also on the growth that the failure caused. From that failure sprouted the little seed of growth so that you became a better person in the end. Perhaps it was you learned determination about yourself, leadership skills. Maybe you enhanced your values or your ethics. Maybe you were more tenacious, or you were able to establish your character more, right? So those are the kind of things you should be brainstorming about. Lastly, you write for your life. Again, don't stress. This is a one-page assignment, but this is how you should be looking at every prompt. So you need to determine a meaningful structure, cause and effect or chronological, right? You can determine it. Was the failure the cause of your growth, right? Or chronological. This happened, then this, then I failed, then I worked at this, and then I overcame it. There's no one right way, but you need to make sure that your structure makes sense. You'll also need to make sure that you include all aspects of the prompt in your response. But remember, if you chunk it, that makes it easier for you to make sure you include all parts. Rather than seeing a little paragraph or multiple sentences, you're just like, oh, 1, 2, 3, boom. Again, don't overemphasize. This is very important. Do not overemphasize what the failure was. We don't necessarily want to spend half of your page focusing on the failure, but we want to focus on how you grew. So your word count, it's a 250-page minimum. You can go a little bit over, of course, but what your main focus on should be is how you grew. We know that you failed. You don't need to focus on how crushing it was, or, you do a little bit, but you don't want to spend 2 pages on everything that led up to the failure. The main focus of this is the failure. If that's what you want your reader to walk away with, and if that's the main part of the prompt, then most of our essay, quote unquote essay, one pager, should be focused on answering that aspect of the prompt. So how did you grow? Of course, please proofread. Remember, I do grade on grammar and mechanics for every assignment. You have Grammarly. This isn't a Google Doc, so you do have a built-in word processing software in terms of spelling mistakes and grammar. And have fun with this at the same time, because this is a creative and individualized piece. You remember, since it is your own personal experience or your own personal failure, you can use I, me, and my, all that stuff, and make sure that you hook the reader with your personal experience. And I've also given you a brief outline here on the right of how you could structure your one-pager. Start with a brief intro or hook, right? Because this is a short thing, you don't want to have an introductory paragraph necessarily, but you still want to hook your reader somehow. Context of the event, who, what, when, where, moment of failure, what happened. Again, don't focus too much on this. This is the main one that you want to be focusing on here. Process of overcoming that failure. And of course, what does it say about you? And I'm going to highlight these for you guys so that you remember that the process and what does it say about you is the main focus of answering this prompt. Not the failure, but what did you do in response to the failure? Did you give up or did you keep going and learn something in the long run? All right. Well, I hope you guys found this helpful. Of course, if you have any questions on this, please feel free to email me, set up Zoom office hours, anything like that. Thanks.